have you.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I think people are slowly coming on, and I think we can get started. I am Margaret Horgan. I'm the Managing Director of the Ann Norton Sculpture Gardens, and I want to tell you all how excited we are that we have come to our first speaker presentation of the season. We had hoped to have it in person, but we are just grateful to have this Zoom opportunity with Valerie Ballant. Before we get started, though, I just sort of wanted to give a state of affairs of how our season has been going here at the Gardens so far. We were very fortunate to be able to open back up in October. As many of you know, the last piece of the puzzle for Ann Norton was actually the gardens themselves and the plan for the way that the property would be encountered by visitors, having the gardens be this sort of jungle experience. And that was the last piece of puzzle for her before she knew that the end of her life was coming. And we're so grateful for that, because she took the time to have this plan laid out for the gardens for this palm and cycad collection, which has now matured. When the specimens were first put together and planted with the help of her friend Sir Peter Smithers, it was over 40 years ago. And now those specimens have turned into majestic palms and cycads that really provide this incredible sanctuary and incredible jungle-like atmosphere right in the middle of this really burgeoning area of development and construction all around us. So we have been able to do quite a bit of outdoor programming. We started off with Sculpture in Motion in the fall. Then we had a jazz series in the month of February honoring Black History Month. We did another plein air festival in partnership with the Lighthouse Center for the Arts. And then we also did a really great community outreach veterans program with Canines for Warriors. So we've been thrilled that since we were able to open the garden gates in October, we've been really busy, and people have been very grateful to have the opportunity to come and see Ann's works. And just recently, we were able to open this exhibition that Valerie's going to talk about today. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Valerie Ballant, who is the Senior Program Manager for the Historic Artists Homes and Studios programs for the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and the author of the guidebook to Historic Artists Homes and Studios, which is absolutely incredible. So Valerie, I will let you take it away. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Margaret, for that lovely introduction. And I want to express my gratitude to everyone at the Ann Norton Sculpture Gardens, in particular Board Chair Francis Fisher. It takes a village to create a virtual Zoom lecture, and as we prepared for this lecture. I'm going to screen share right away and get started. Great. So as Margaret noted, I'm Valerie Ballant, and I head the Historic Artists Homes and Studios program of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which we affectionately refer to by our acronym HOSS, and which I will use probably throughout this talk, and of which Ann Norton Sculpture Gardens is a valued member. I'm delighted to be here to talk about the program and our recent guidebook, which you see pictured on the screen. The publication is complemented by a photographic exhibition, which opens in 2 weeks at Ann Norton Sculpture Gardens, and which I hope everyone will go see. Many of these exhibit images are included in the book, and they depict artists working in their studios, giving entree into working methods and spaces, but also the personality of the artists themselves, as I hope my lecture will help demonstrate. The National Trust created HOSS in 1999 to support those places dedicated to national artistic legacy. And what began as a network of about a dozen sites has grown to a membership consortium of 48 sites across 22 states, representing the legacies of over 300 artists and spanning 3 centuries in American art. Entrance to the program is through a vigorous and competitive application process, and all member sites represent the highest bar in stewardship and interpretation, the Ann Norton Sculpture Gardens included. Haas's administrative home is at Chesterwood, home of the sculpture of the Lincoln Memorial, which graces the book's cover on the left of your screen, and where I work when we are not in a pandemic. Collectively, these sites in the network, all preserved and now open as public independent museums, provide opportunities to more than 1 million visitors annually to engage in place-based and immersive experience. The guidebook represents the first time these sites have all been brought together with over 250 images. I like to think of it as sort of an Art Survey 101 course. 2019 marked the 20th anniversary of the program, and this book is a celebratory benchmark of how much we've grown. Something I love about the program, the book, and the photo exhibition is that we seek to represent the depth and breadth of the places where art was made in this country, from the converted urban commercial space in Chicago, designed by the irreverent 20th century imagist Roger Brown, who you see pictured in the sample entry, to the bucolic and rural American Impressionist colony in Old Lyme, Connecticut, where hundreds of artists, such as Childe Hassam, pictured here painting apple blossoms en plein air, documented the beautiful scenes around them in thousands of works of art. To the Southern California workshop of artisanal furniture maker Sam Maloof, where he handcrafted over 5,000 pieces of furniture. This image conveys Maloof's intensely tactile relationship with everything he made. To the West Palm Beach oasis, where Anne Norton, like so many artists, designed her own studio and created site-specific masterworks that you can see today, and everywhere in between across America. This afternoon, I hope to take us on our first short journey together, albeit virtually, and to entice you to visit the Haas exhibition through vivid images of these artists and the insights they provide. I want to place Anne Norton within the context of other sites in the network and introduce you to some of the other talented women artist colleagues, several of whom have only recently been accepted into Haas a little over a month ago. But first, I want to take a slight detour. This is the Lincoln Memorial. Its impact transcends art. It has become synonymous with national ideals of democracy, personal freedom, and social justice, right to assemble in protest and celebration. And it has become a place of pilgrimage for millions and is perhaps our nation's most famous piece of art in the world. But it's easy to forget that objects like this were made by a person and in a place, created through physical work and engagement with mental creativity and genius, by artists who were all contemporary and groundbreaking in their own era, who lived in places that both inspired them and were transformed by them, and in places where they played out their life narratives, where they enjoyed triumph and suffered loss, and where they were as much people as they were artists, and I mean artists with a capital A. If art in museums and gallery spaces or a public monument is the output, these preserved sites represent all the input. And as preserved places that were once the locus of creativity, they are now uniquely poised to inspire visitors and living artists today. My own journey, artistic genesis, began here at Chesterwood in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, the summer home and studio of sculptor Daniel Chester French. I visited here on a special arts program trip with my family at the young age of 10. Yes, I learned about the Lincoln, but I also discovered how he built this ingenious rail track just beyond the doors of the studio to take works in progress out into the open air to view how changes in light and perspective would affect a piece. I roamed around the artist's designed garden and woodland walks, took in the majesty of the view of Monument Mountain, which inspired French to buy this piece of property. I heard about the family life he nurtured here as a respite for the rest of the year spent at his studio in New York City, and how he called this place and his time in it heaven. More than a decade later, when I went to apply for my first professional internship and saw an ad for Chesterwood, all the sensory power of that visit flooded back to me in an instant. I still feel it today when I am there, a sort of genius loci, perhaps the guiding spirit of those who originally lived there, but also those of us who are responsible for that legacy today. That is the power of place that every site in the network and in this book has to offer. And I hope I will manage to evoke some of that for you all this afternoon. But I also hope to illustrate the connections and comparisons between artists, their methods and their impulses, including Anne Norton. The book and the exhibition include artists and places you might be familiar with and those awaiting your discovery. On the upper course is Andrew Wyeth, the center figure in 3 generations of artists. His local boyhood home of Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania, and nearby Crooner Farm fueled him his entire career. He made works in a converted schoolhouse turned studio, and to be there is to better understand the work and the complexities of this deeply introspective human being. This image of Wyeth on the left aptly captures the reflective qualities of this artist. By contrast, on the lower course is Grace Hudson, who you probably have never heard of. She's a formally educated portrait artist of the indigenous Pomo people, who along with her ethnographer husband designed an arts and crafts home in Northern California's Mendocino Valley. Here, she is surrounded by all the collections which help to inform and give validity to her depictions of the people of her region. Let's take a look a bit more inside. This is the sign on Andrew Wyeth's studio. It lets you immediately know the nature of this person. But it's a good reminder that these were ultimately private spaces and that we are entering the inner sanctum. It's interesting to see what various artists needed to inspire them or what environments they needed to surround themselves with in order to be productive. So let's take a little journey together. I can't possibly get us to 48 sites, but I do hope to entice you to discover more. Each of these sites and artists warrant entire seminars and monographs of their own. So I'm just going to barely scratch the surface. But I also want to use these sites to flesh out some larger concepts about artists and spaces more generally. This is someone many of us feel we know or have at least heard of, Winslow Homer. Here he is in front of one of his marine works painted at his home and studio in Prouts Neck, Maine. This photo, which is in the exhibition, reinforces the image we have of him as a grizzled recluse of a man holed up in rugged Maine, an image he helped to perpetuate, by the way. By the time he moves here full time, he has already become a well-known illustrator of Harper's Weekly, a documentarian of the Civil War, and a genre painter of pastoral and rural life. He lives and works out of a converted carriage barn, which is part of a bigger complex owned by his family. Notice that there are relatively minimal windows on this facade, but I want you to look at that balcony. This is the view from that balcony. His brother used to say he would wear out the floorboards from pacing on it. And this was a view Homer came to know intimately. The cliff walk is just a short ways away from the studio. Either before or after you visit, you can see this painting, weather beaten, on view at the Portland Museum of Art, who owns the site. This view makes you understand Homer, what moved him as a man, as well as an artist. You stand in the painting when you are there. You feel the spray, you hear the surf's roar, and you taste the salt. It is a uniquely immersive experience and provides insight into the mental process of art making and inspiration. Here are 2 people we also think we know. The life and careers of Lee Krasner and Jackson Pollock are epic. Drama on scale, warranting a major Hollywood motion picture starring Ed Harris and Marcia Gay Harden. But they lived together in a secluded hamlet beyond the center of East Hampton in a small cottage, painting in an outbuilding which overlooked the nearby Saltwater Creek. Here they are in their respective painting modes, both very active processes. If you come to see these images in the exhibition, you will be able to really zero in on the physical movements that were required to create the final artworks. And this is their studio, a former fishing shack / barn with no hint of the wonders that lie within. And here is the interior of that studio. When you visit, you stand on that floor and process is all around you, not just on the floor. The sweeping arcs of her painting method can be seen on the walls, and her paint splattered shoes are in the entryway. So you get to see their distinct processes in one visual swoop. It is transformative, as I know from personal experience. It's one thing to see an artwork displayed, but the ability to stand in the space where the artist conjured and toiled is something else entire. And that is some of the magic I'm seeking to spark in all of you this afternoon. And this is a detail of that floor. You might think it was a painting if I did not draw attention to the floorboards. You may not know much about abstract expressionism before you go, or frankly, you may not even like it, but you get it when you are there. And if you have seen hundreds of Pollock works on museum walls, as I have, this makes it all come together for you. This is the embodiment of the physical process of art, and you just can't get that anywhere else. Like Norton, Krasner worked in numerous modes and media, employing collage in some of her abstract works, as you see on the upper left, titled Desert Moon. Here you also see her with large-scale works propped up in the studio. At right, you see a work by Anne Norton in the same abstract expressionist vein, on view in the upcoming exhibition, displayed alongside the Haas photographs. Throughout the talk, I'll show you perhaps lesser known connections between Anne's work and the wider art world. It's really wonderful to show some of the breadth of this particular artist and her talent. I'd like to compare the studio space of another figurative sculptor, although one very different from both Daniel Chester French and Anne Norton. That is what's so great about Haas and this book. It allows for these juxtapositions. This is the New York City home of direct carver Chaim Gross. Like Anne Norton, he was also an arts educator. He immigrated to this country at 20 to escape the increasing anti-Semitic wave. His is a self-proclaimed American dream story, the type of narrative all these sites have to offer, universal stories of perseverance, triumph, and loss. These help to break down the distance we often create of the genius artist persona. Here, Gross is standing on the staircase that leads down to the studio he helped co-design. This is a modern view of right of that space, and you can immediately see how intact it is. And here is a close-up. Always remember that these sites are about the physicality of making. All the tools of the trade are here, the chisels, the sketches, the pencils, just as they are in Anne Norton's studio. You can start to make connections between the process and the finished works. And this happens time and again at these sites, because at their core, these places are where art was made. You have, as scholar Wanda Korn, who wrote the book's foreword asserts, returned to the scene of the crime. But these sites also allow us to venture beyond the studio space. These are also the places of everyday life, including personal decorative choices we can all relate to, although perhaps achieved with a more talented eye than some of us can aspire to. This room shows us but one example of the consistent curatorial impulses of these artists. Here, Gross has arranged his own art among his collections of African masks, which were highly influential to his work, an example of how inspiration is not always linear. In this display are also works by colleagues such as Red Grooms and Raphael Sawyer, as well as those of European masters such as Renoir, alongside the more mundane trappings of real life, like the record player. This composing is an extension of what artists do in the studio, but I think it is also illustrates what is present at so many of these sites, not so much life imitating art, but an integration of life and art. Like Gross, Norton also worked in wood. Here at left are rough-hewn pieces awaiting further carving alongside finished works. The pinkish red piece at left, Untitled Gateway of 1959, is in the upcoming exhibition, as is the piece at far right, another Untitled Gateway done 13 years later. I love how the site has enhanced the photo exhibit with works by Norton and reference images of works by other artists showing connections and contrasts. I wanted to give you a modernist counterpoint to the more traditional homes I've shown so far. This is an artist couple who was deeply involved in the American abstract artist movement and who also had homes in Paris and New York City. In Massachusetts, they created a rural retreat designed in concert with a local architect. Often the house, not just the studio, served as a laboratory, an incubator for ideas, a place for experimentation, for trial, and for error alongside success. Here you see stucco and glass brick and a fresco designed by Morris in the garage breezeway. All interesting material choices, to be sure, although perhaps not the most practical for New England winter climate. This was one of the first modern structures built in the state. This is a really interesting couple. He was an art critic and editor for numerous publications, including the Partisan Review, and she was a successful opera singer with starring roles in Tosca and Aida. Her more extroverted personality and his shyness are both reflected in the images you see on the screen. This is so indicative of the complex lives of these artists in the network, and we seek to make these biographical details come alive in the book, but you also get a glimpse of that when you look at the photographs of the artists themselves. Here is the living room in that same house, replete with Argentinian leather floor, Art Deco furnishings, and Susie's stunning piano. Beyond the large windows, a lush landscape, orchards, pool house, and pond await. This was a glamorous couple, and this house reflects that. But I want to draw attention to the murals and bas-relief by Morissette Wright. There are frescoes, reliefs, and murals made by George and Susie throughout this entire house. These are works of art that can only be seen here in the places for which they were designed. Many sites in the network include these exclusive elements, including Ann Norton Sculpture Gardens. Here are Frelinghuysen's murals in the dining room, a totally different style and palette than that of her husband. She has inserted corrugated metal into the fresco surface to create a sculptural element. Needing to please only themselves rather than clients, artists are completely free to experiment and explore when designing their own homes. Again, I want to compare the consistent cubist mode of Frelinghuysen on the right with similar attributes found in Norton's sculpture of a rooster at left. She's such a chameleon. Norton can kind of do anything. There are other artists who completely design their own spaces and environs, where painters and sculptors stretch their creativity to include architecture, landscape architecture, and interior design into one integrated, holistic artistic vision, as did Alban Polaszczak, the only other current Haas site in Florida. The Czech-born figurative sculptor first made a living executing ecclesiastical works in churches throughout the Midwest. He went on to have successful careers as a commissioned sculptor and as head of the sculpture department for 30 years at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. He retired to Winter Park, Florida, to build his dream home and studio with the intent to keep sculpting even as he gave up active teaching, and with plans to open the grounds to the public after his death, just like Ann Norton. The concrete building he designed includes Moravian and Slavic influences from his childhood, such as the colorful tiles in the courtyard. Soon after moving to Florida, though, he suffered a debilitating stroke, which paralyzed his entire left side. Wheelchair-bound, he continued to sculpt only with his right hand. This image at left, which is in the upcoming exhibition, shows him as a younger sculptor and professor. The lakeside landscape was designed to feature Polaszczak's works. This includes casts of earlier commissions. Here is Lady of the Roman Campagna. Polaszczak produced a wide range of subject matter, from allegorical to portrait to mythological, and ideas from his own imagination. This is The Sower, and the original of this piece is located at the Chicago Botanic Garden. It's an idealized male figure who is sowing the seeds of his own future, a self-determination allegory which served as one of Polaszczak's personal credos. It shows both his mastery of human form and the use of the bronze medium. I now want to reintroduce you to someone so many of you are already familiar with, but invite you to consider both the artist and the site in the context of all I've laid out so far, through the lenses of inspiration, process, experimentation, exploration, and art-life integration, as what she created at Ann Norton Sculpture Garden exemplifies all these concepts. Here she is hard at work at the piece Seven Figures, which is seen today on site, alongside many other outdoor works she created for her landscape. I think this image captures her spirit. She's definitely not afraid to get into the thick of things in what is a very physical process. Sculpture making, by definition, is a very, very physical process. As many already know, here are the Bryce Cliffs in Utah that inspired the work. Inspiration for art can come from literally anywhere, and it's not always linear. Think back to Chaim Gross and the African masks he collected. Of course, the various aspects of sculpture making are displayed in the studio she designed. such as armatures for modeling clay and plaster models for works like Seven Figures, some of which can actually be seen in the upcoming exhibition. But studio spaces also contain the less glamorous requirements of art making, such as the slop sink at left. This is where the mental meets the physical. All these objects provide a link directly back to art process, from genesis to manifestation. But Norton's studio also features items that are very rarely preserved. These are the complex patina compounds that create surfaces on bronze sculpture, yet another medium that Norton was proficient at. These compounds are a bit of the alchemy that for me is the very essence of creativity. And just one another example of the multifaceted talents of Norton as an artist. But this, as you all know, is what awaits you just outside, a multidisciplinary expression of art, architecture, and landscape, which happens at so many sites. These are monumental brickworks, late in career, completely integrated into a landscape of Norton's co-design, showing the ever-evolving practice of an artist, which is central to life, dedicated to making art over many decades. But that's only part of this compelling story. As Norton faced terminal leukemia, she embarked on creating a lush tropical oasis in her suburban town with the goal to leave it for her community and to enjoy in perpetuity. I personally love this story and talk about it all the time because it is so deeply personal to Norton's life, and it speaks to the basic human desires to create and connect, but also to endure. Not everyone decides to build their dream home or studio from scratch. Some demonstrate their ingenious application of what we call in the preservation field adaptive reuse, taking an existing building and transforming it to suit your needs and vision. Georgia O'Keeffe's home and studio in Abiquiu, New Mexico is perhaps one of the more famous. Once she moved here, the desert landscape inspired her and transformed her art, becoming synonymous with both her and her work. She had to wait years until the Catholic Church would sell her the site, and then painstakingly made it her own through preservation of the traditional adobe, while also adding modern touches such as the large 1950s picture windows you see, which optimized her sweeping vistas. This image captures her control over all photographic images depicting her. She chose specific photographers, the clothes she wears, almost always black, this is a rare exception, and often the specific poses. And here is the interior of her sitting room looking out at cottonwood trees. The spare quality is representative of her modern sensibilities and is punctuated with few objects like this Bertoia bird chair at left, which almost serves like a sculpture in the room. All this embodies the expected aesthetics of the mother of modernism. The infamous black door in the inner studio courtyard was the subject of more than 20 paintings by O'Keeffe, but she also produced and displayed sculpture. Below are examples of Norton's own works, embracing a modernist ethos, showing her adeptness once again of executing works linked to diverse artistic philosophies and movements. The sketch of the dog at lower right is in the upcoming Haas exhibition. I want to turn briefly to an artist who signifies the rich personal narratives that abound when examining these artists. Thomas Hart Benton is primarily known today as the populist artist who created murals celebrating the daily lives of everyday people. He's also perhaps best known as being the teacher of Jackson Pollock. Ironically, this artist of the people lived in a Gilded Age manse in a wealthy suburb of St. Louis during a large part of his career. This photo captured the image he wished to portray: down to earth, flannel plaid shirt, smoking a pipe, and easygoing, but he was also highly educated, fiercely opinionated, an accomplished musician, and an author of his own biography. When we visit these sites, we can learn so much more about the complexities of the person than we can when we see an exhibition of their work in the museum. Benton died in his studio while completing work on a major canvas. His wife immediately began planning for legacy and expressed her desire that everything be left just as it was, like he had just stepped out of the room. And you can see this in the image today, and you can see it when you go visit the site. Known as a realist and regionalist, Benton's work is art as social commentary, both the historical past and his present day. Norton sometimes also worked in this vein. Both these works are on view in the upcoming exhibition. I'd like to conclude by briefly showing you the 4 newest sites to the Haas network. The display at ANSG represents the very first time these images have been part of the Haas exhibition. All feature the legacies of talented women artists who were also all devoted arts educators, just like Anne Norton. As with Norton, when considering their impact, it's critical to not just think about their art, but also the influence they had on numerous artists through their teaching. The first new site is the home of artist and arts educator couple Victor and Mabel D'Amico on Long Island. This is a couple who transformed modern arts education. The house they designed and built is filled with Mabel's art, handmade clothing and jewelry designs. She made art out of almost anything, including fishing buoys, such as the piece you see here at lower left. He was the first head of the education department at the Museum of Modern Art, and there he is teaching on the nearby beach. Together, the couple ran an art school out of a converted retired Navy barge, which still operates today. As the site continues its research, they begin to understand that some of the teaching methods previously attributed to Victor were instead actually concepts created by Mabel. Finnish-born Loija Saarinen, wife of internationally acclaimed architect Ilaja Saarinen, studied and practiced sculpture prior to immigrating to the United States and establishing the weaving studio at the Cranbrook Academy of Art, the largest studio and commercial enterprise at this now famous teaching institution, known as the cradle of modernism. In addition to running the largest studio at the Academy, Loija designed several landscapes on the school's grounds. Examples of her textiles are on view in her preserved family home on the Academy campus. The house in which she and their family lived is a total work of art. Her story and contributions have historically been subsumed by those of her husband, but they are now being championed and attracting the attention they deserve. And here are just some fantastic examples of Loija's masterful textile work within the family home. This is Marguerite Wildenhain, who studied sculpture in Berlin before becoming a Bauhaus-trained ceramicist. Emigrating to the United States to escape anti-Semitism, she established the arts colony at Pond Farm, where her writings and teaching influenced generations of artists and were seminal to the modern studio ceramics movement in this country. The locus of the colony was this humble barn, which still includes the intact potter's equipment, the only preserved site of its kind in the nation. And lastly, Hilltop House and Stone Quarry Hill Art Park represent the legacy of sculptor and multidisciplinary artist Dorothy Reister. She purposely relocated away from traditional urban art centers to settle in rural upstate New York. She chose an extensive property just outside the charming lakeside village of Cazenovia. At the top of their hill, she and her engineer husband designed and executed a series of A-frame buildings, including the studio, but also a home based on the design tenets of Frank Lloyd Wright. Like Anne Norton, Dorothy worked in many disciplines, including painting, ceramics, wood, and metalwork. She was also an ardent preservationist and conservationist. Every single solitary thing in this house is hand-wrought by Dorothy, from masonry to lighting fixtures to tableware to all the tiles you see here in the kitchen, which can also be found in the bathrooms. At right are all her studio materials, and you can see that she often worked in a traditionally figurative vein, but she was just as likely to be welding something outside. That's her sculpture, Contemplating Man, that you see on the left. She established a sculpture park on her sweeping landscape to provide opportunities for herself and other artists to exhibit large-scale works of art, but also as a place of convening for community. The park is still an active venue for living artists today, one of the longest continuously operating parks like this in the nation. She, probably more than anyone, reminds me a lot of Anne Norton, not just in her diverse artistic talents, but in her commitment to create a meaningful space for her community as part of her larger life ambition. Making connections like these are among the most satisfying aspects of learning about, but also visiting these places. I hope this lecture will start you on your own journey and that you will see the exhibition soon to be on view at the gardens. Many sites in Haas remain closed for the immediate future, but they hope to open later this spring and summer. Please consult with individual sites to see about opportunities for visitation, as this situation is fluid, as we all know. The guidebook is available at all major realtors and through the publisher Architectural Press, but also through Ann Norton Sculpture Gardens. To keep up to date on Haas and our work, I urge you to join up for our newsletter on our website, artisthomes.org, or to join us on Facebook. Thank you. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And you've heard a lot from me. I've been talking for a bit. So I'd like to bring Margaret back into the conversation about the sort of amazing aspects of these spaces. And Margaret, so much of what we learn about these sites represents the intersection of place and biography. And how would you best describe the roots of Ann Norton's art and her journey through life as it evolved?
Well, Ann Norton's journey as an artist actually began at a very young age. She had an aunt, Clara Weaver Parrish, that was a very well-known artist that served as a major source of inspiration for Ann. And as a child, she loved to draw. She even started a drawing club, as she called it, with the children that lived on the plantation with her. They had one pencil and a sketch pad, and they would all take turns drawing different parts of the picture. So she started early. However, she did go off to college at Smith and pursued a degree in religious studies. She thought that she might be a missionary at first. And upon graduating with honors, she took a little turn and decided she wanted to follow her dream to be an artist. And she went to New York City and she studied at Cooper Union and the Art Students League. And she really tried to make it as an artist right in the middle of the Depression. While her parents might have encouraged her in all manners except financially, Ann really was definitely the definition of a struggling financial artist while she was in New York. So ultimately, she did have great success. She had some shows internationally as well as in New York. But ultimately, she realized that in order to be able to continue to create, she would need to have a steady job to support herself. And she was offered the opportunity to come down here and become the first sculpting instructor at the Norton Museum, which was then the Norton Museum and School of Art. There she formed a great relationship and friendship with Ralph and Elizabeth Norton, his wife at the time. And she was very instrumental in helping to choose some of the more modern pieces that are now in the collection of the Norton. Elizabeth Norton passed away, and Ralph and Ann Norton, who had already formed a wonderful friendship, got married, and he built an artist studio for her here on this site in 1948 as a wedding gift. And it was that opportunity that really allowed Ann to create these monumental works throughout the gardens that she said were always in her head, and to continue her dream of wanting to create works that people could be uplifted by in this incredible tropical setting. And from there, she traveled throughout the world, throughout the country, and sort of her work exploded. She was able to, she had the time and the opportunity to create in all the different manners between, carving in cedar, wire armatures. She did it all, and we're very fortunate that we have her just about complete life's body of work here throughout the gardens, in the studio, and in our archives.
That's amazing.
But I have a question for you, Valerie. Now, from the desert vistas of Georgia O'Keeffe's New Mexico Ranch to Winslow Homer Studio on the rocky, windswept coast of Maine, what was it like to author the first book celebrating American artists and their sites of extraordinary creativity?
Well, it's not the totally first book, but it is the first book to bring these particular sites together and in a guidebook. It was daunting, but it was exciting. I had to introduce readers to the artists, their art, and their space, all in less than 800 words per artist and site. I'd been to many of these sites before, but I wanted so much to capture some of the wonder and the awe that I had experienced myself when I first visited these places, and try to express in words and images what made each place unique. And I wanted to really sweep readers away. The hope was that it could be an entry point and a gateway for those who had never studied art at all. But I also wanted it to be interesting to those who were devotees or experts on certain artists or who had visited sites before, providing fun facts that they might not know. It was fun for me to show the humble spaces where some of the country's most famous art pieces of art were made, like the converted garage barn where Grant Wood painted American Gothic. And I began every chapter with a little quote by the artist, hoping to gain insight into the personality or artistic philosophies of the artist. And in Grant Wood's case, it said, "All I ever learned of value," I'm paraphrasing now, "I learned while milking a cow," which may or may not be true. By contrast, Anne Norton's chapter says, "Art should be beautiful and made to last." It was challenging for me to concisely express all my thoughts and ideas about places that I knew intimately, such as the Hudson River School artist Frederick Church's Persian-inspired home and artist-designed landscape at Olana, just 20 miles north of where I am from right now, and a site where I had worked for 17 wonderful years before coming to Haas. But the most fun was illuminating the fascinating artists like Elizabeth Ney, who were successful in their own lifetime, but have become lesser known today. And I hope that by reading the book, people are inspired by her art, but also her biography as a suffragist and an ardent advocate for human rights. And of course, I had an amazing editor, Alexandra Anderson. Everybody needs one, and I couldn't have done it without her. What I just want to say, this is a really unique publication. We deliberately set out to create a guidebook, which we hoped would get people out to explore. And it's meant to be put in your car or your purse or your backpack. And we certainly could not anticipate COVID-19 realities when we first started this project. So now I hope it will first become dog-eared by people marking all the places that they want to go. And then even more well-worn with maybe like the binding breaking when people can embark on real travel again. And I really hope that we achieve that. And so I have another question for you, because I just said that I had seen so many of these sites, but while I feel like I have come to know and love your site, I have actually, I must confess, not been there yet. Although I am definitely, as I have threatened all of you, visiting later this year. So Margaret, what is the thing you love most about Anne Norton Sculpture Gardens as a legacy to its community and visitors?
I think what I love most and that I really think about every day is the fact that Anne had such a specific vision for what she wanted this property to be. She was a conservationist. She wanted it to be a sanctuary for migratory birds and butterflies. And we had actually last week, we're in, as some of you may know, we're in the final stages of a complete preservation of our artist studio, which is being painted right now. But we have scaffolding up. There's tons of construction going on, trucks everywhere while we're in this process. And in the midst of the whole thing, yesterday, or excuse me, last Thursday, was this incredible whippoorwill that had just perched on outside one of the little palms and sat and watched everything happen. And whippoorwills, you don't usually see them that often during the daytime. It didn't move for 8 hours. It was fine. It finally took off at the end of the day. We all watched it fly away, but it was really one of those moments where we thought, we knew Anne would be very, very happy to see that. She saw way ahead of time what was going to be happening in this area. I mean, we are this little 2-acre postage stamp property with an historic home that's been touched by 2 incredible Florida architects, beyond Florida architects. We have an artist studio, we have our monumental sculptures, and all around us is this burgeoning development. I mean, when you look over the tops of the canopy, you can see cranes and you can see high-rise condos. And she knew that was all coming. And I just feel that she would be so thrilled if she saw how her property and what she wanted everyone to be able to enjoy down the road has really evolved and been exactly what she wanted. And people come in and they have this direct encounter with her artwork, and I feel that you can really feel her presence here. And I would say that that's what I think is the most exciting about the property.
That's the genius loci I was talking about.
That's right.
And you
That's
just
right.
can't get it anywhere else. In a virtual
That's
world, you have to go to the
That's
place.
right. And I just have one last question for you, Valerie, and then we'd love to open it up if anyone else has questions. Would you be able to, as the Haas Senior Program Manager, highlight some of the lesser known creative figures who contributed to our history that we might not know about, but you would encourage us to visit their sites in the future?
Yes, and of course, as a former curator, I can't resist more images, but women continue to be underrepresented in terms of contributions to our artistic heritage. And many women who were married to or were daughters of male artists who now have sites with their names on them were also artists in their own right. And those stories are only now coming to the forefront. Other women artists who do have sites preserved to their legacy remain unknown to many, many people. One is the home of photographer Alice Austin in Staten Island, New York, and her images capturing the life of everyday people in lower Manhattan were groundbreaking, sort of a precursor to photojournalism, all made while carrying her heavy photo equipment into New York on the back of a bike, dressed in a full corset. And today her home is now designated as a national LGBTQ site, which is finally giving agency to her life as a gay woman. And the National Trust and Haas are committed to increasing the program's diversity to include more people of color, Indigenous and self-taught artists, and it will be our focus over the next few years. But one inspiring artist already in Haas is folk artist Clementine Hunter, who worked on a plantation her entire life and did not even begin creating until she was in her 50s and a grandmother, which is just proving it's never too late, all of you out there, to start to be creative. And she created a series of murals depicting her life on the plantation using the upper story of a building built and used by slaves, sort of reappropriation of this space, and it's incredibly moving. But equally moving is the site recently restored in Boise, Idaho, where deaf and self-taught artist James Castle created works out of his family's small home and adjacent shed. He's known for being so resourceful that he created works using soot and his own saliva applied with a sharpened stick. And to go there and to be there is to understand that the need to communicate and creatively express really can overcome even the harshest obstacles. And it's incredibly, incredibly powerful to be there. But lastly, I would urge people to visit sites that are more recently opened or represent artists working in modes that they may not know about, or frankly, even like the Victorian home of conceptual artist David Ireland. And he transformed this traditional home into something completely different, applying polyurethane to all the walls so that they glow like amber, and made sculptures out of everyday objects like brooms. And sometimes stepping into these types of places and into minds of these artists can expand your own, and frankly mine, notions about what art can and should be. But I just want to be clear that every single one of these 48 places can reignite the creativity that lies in each of us. And for me, that's probably the most important reason of all to visit, all 48 of them.
Thank you, Valerie. Anne-Marie, I would love to open up to the audience if anyone has any questions. If you could unmute anybody, if you had anything to ask of Valerie.
Absolutely. I will unmute the audience, and I believe Frances Fisher had the first question. Frances?
Valerie, thank you
Hello.
for an outstanding presentation.
Thank
I
you.
want to know what motivated you to write the first guidebook to historic sites across this country.
Well, I wish I could take the credit for it, but I have to be honest. It was, I work at Chesterwood, and I work with a colleague, Donna Hassler, the executive director of Haas, and Haas also has an advisory committee. And as we moved toward the 20th anniversary, while I was still a curator at Olana, they really began to think about a publication. And so when I came to work at Haas, my very first week, I had a meeting with the potential publisher. I knew it was something I was going to have to do, and I had to submit a proposal. And but I was so incredibly excited because so many of these sites were places I had gone over many, many years, and it gave me such an excuse to sort of go back and either physically or just mentally and remind myself of what was so incredibly special the first time I walked into one of these places. And I think it was a daunting task. It's been a little over a year now. And so it's kind of like it all didn't happen, but I'm just so really pleased that they're all together in one place and take you, I hope, on both a narrative and visual journey to places that even I've had art historians say to me, I felt like I knew where all these preserved places were, but there were artists and places I never heard about. And then other people, when they tell me, you know, I don't necessarily like to go to traditional museums, but I love to go to these sites, that sort of makes those efforts all worthwhile. And so I wish I could trade credit for the idea, but I will take credit for the hard work that went into it, although I had many hands helping me as well.
Well, indeed. Thank you, Valerie. This was an incredible for everyone at every site across this country. And the fact that we had that book, it was an armchair read, but something we could journey with. So we really thank you. And I know Margaret has questions as well.
Anne Marie, did you have someone?
We may have another person, Lisa Butler from the audience. Lisa, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. Actually, it was a lovely presentation, and I think even seeing them virtually, you know, it ignites that creative spirit. So, you know, great job, and thank you to all of you. I'm just curious, I'm working with a partner, and we've been working for the last 3 years to catalog all the private artist museums and single artist museums in the world, which, as you know, is like a big process of discovery. So I'm wondering, would you categorize the places in your guidebook as single artist museums, or sometimes, you know, private because there's more than one person? And also, like, do you know much about the legality of were these places set up as foundations, or were they kept private within families? I'm just curious about the insight you have kind of in this.
Sure, thank you. Yes, that is a daunting project, because although there are 48 sites in Haas, I've identified many more of that, some of which are coming online, some of which you know, we continue to be in conversation with over many years to get them to the level in which they come into Haas. Relative to historic artist homes and studios, we really focus on the former homes and working studios and collective spaces of artists versus, let's say, a purpose-built museum,
right,
to a particular artist, whether that be, I can think of many, but we really focus on the places where they lived and worked, although sometimes for longer or lesser periods of time, recognizing that in some instances, they had multiple locations, and therefore these singular places served as like an archetype, not only just for them, but sometimes for a whole movement in American art. And the second part of your question, I'm sorry, Lisa, can you just repeat it? Because I got it.
Actually, just because also, oh, hold on a second. Am I muted? Oh, no. But the second part was, my partner is also the wife of an artist who's been
how they were
50 years. Like,
yes.
Yeah, and so how they're really legally structured a lot of times.
So the answer to that is as varied as the artists who are in here. Some of them were saved now, they're coming up on their 50th, their 100th year anniversaries. And in many instances were saved by women's groups, just like Mount Vernon was saved. Some
Just
are
like
artist, some are artist foundations, some are owned like Alana by state entities and partnerships with private 501(c)s. I'm always in conversation with any number of descendants or living artists talking about what legacy looks like. And I think the one thing that I notice is as we get further into the 20th century and into the 21st century definitively, you have many more artist foundations where the thing that is the mother lode to me, the artist home and studio, is actually sold to provide the capital for the other working parts of the foundation. And I can name many, many instances. There are many more artist foundations than there are preserved artist homes and studios. But part of our job is to really continue the dialogue with people planning for legacy and show them that there are other potential models to look at.
I love that. That's actually so important because we are working on legacy also. And, you know, I just wouldn't have thought of that. And it was also really interesting how many artists were already planning for their legacy while they were creating these properties. Like that was pretty illuminating and a good thing to keep in mind. So
Yeah,
thank you.
some do have the forethought and many do not. I must be frank. Many leave it to others to decide
Oh, yeah.
because they just want to be making art. You know, they want to be making art during their life, and making art is who they are and not just what they do. And so hopefully both the work of Haas and the Artists Endowed Foundation groups at the Aspen Institute, you know, sort of collectively, we really try to be those sort of thought leaders relative to these kinds of discussions.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your work because we've also pulled down a lot of resources from both websites all the time, and we'll continue to follow you and definitely excited to get your book. So
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks so much.
Okay, I
think we have
if
time.
we might have time for one more question if we have one. Anne-Marie, were there any other questions?
Does anyone else have a question? If you'd like to unmute yourself, we have about 2 minutes. No, then I think we may be finished.
Okay. Valerie, I can't thank you enough. I learn so much every time you open your mouth and say anything. I always want to write down your words because I just love how you express the lives, tell the stories of the lives of these artists. And thank you. You're such a great friend to us. And I really enjoyed this today. And thank you everybody for coming on. Please come and see the exhibition. We're open. The exhibition will be up in the house through May. And we'd love to see you. And maybe if you do come and see it, you'll have a little more, well, I know you'll have a lot more insight into the exhibition and the lives of some of the artists that are featured in it. Thank you.
And I just want to thank everyone. I know that there's a lot of competition for your eyeballs in the digital world we're living in. And I'm just very grateful and honored to have been part of your day-to-day. And right back at you, Margaret. You are also a great friend to Haas. So thank you so very, very much to all of you. And have a lovely afternoon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.